Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be doing an update on the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So it's been a pretty eventful week for Bitcoin. We have had a significant bounce off the 20-week moving average. This is the moving average we've discussed at length over the last several years, and the importance of it. When we get above it, we would like to hold it as support in order to get another run higher. Now, recently, we've tested it a number of times, in fact. We tested the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA on September 6th. We tested them on September 20th, the week of September 20th, I should say, and then, of course, the week of September 27th. Now, we also tested the 21-week EMA on the week of September 13th. So what does this mean? Well, so far, Bitcoin has had 4 consecutive weeks of testing the bull market support band. And this, of course, is really great for Bitcoin. Now, some of the things we've discussed before are what constitutes a full test, a full successful test of the 20-week moving average. Well, we said ideally you would like to hold it on a multi-week time frame, if not lasting several months. So then it begs the question, well, can we definitively say that this was a successful test? Well, one of the things I said a couple of weeks ago is that the longer we hold it, ultimately, I do believe our odds increase. Okay, I mean, everything is based on probabilities and whatnot, and of course, there exists a universe where we still dump below it. But the point is, in this situation, is to say, we've held it for 4 weeks. Is it possible that this is the only test we get and we are off to the races? It is certainly possible. But if we want to navigate this market in a conservative way, which I would argue is the best way to navigate it, what we would like to see before claiming victory immediately is to put in a new local high. Now, I'm not talking about 64K. I'm not saying that Bitcoin has to go to 64K before we say that this is a successful test. So far, this is a successful test, okay? I mean, if Bitcoin just goes up from this point, I'm fairly comfortable with the market. I don't think it necessarily has to retest it for several months. But the main barrier in the short term is to put in a new local high beyond what we put in August and September, okay? Because back in August, we had this rally that led into September as well that took us all the way up to around $53,000. So ideally speaking, Bitcoin would take out that local high after this test of the bull market support band. Now, that doesn't mean we have to do that this week. We could do it this week, but there's also chances that we just kind of hang out in this area and maybe even continue to test the bull market support band off and on. So far, the 20-week SMA has only been wicks for testing it. We don't really need anything more than that. If you go back to last September, that's all we really had. I mean, the weekly closes never actually came right down to the bull market support band. We were always slightly above it, so it's not like we have to go down to those levels. So now, if we want an update here on where they currently are, the 20-week SMA is now, and of course this will depend on the exchange you use, but it's at 41.5K. 41.5 or 41.6. Again, it will depend on the exchange that you use. The 21-week EMA is at 44.3K. So in the event of a drop, we would like to stay above those levels. Now, for the astute observers, you'll notice that the 20-week SMA has gone up for the first time in a long time. You can see now that we are starting to move back up. Well, why are we starting to move back up? Well, we discussed this, right? You go back 20 weeks, and you can see that we're starting to get down into this area. So now, instead of replacing all these candles up here with candles down here, meaning you're basically taking 1/20th of the calculation that goes into the 20-week moving average and replacing a higher number with a lower number, meaning the 20-week SMA would drop, now you no longer even are including these numbers, and so every week that goes by now, you'll be replacing one of these candles with one up here, assuming we can stay above the bull market support band. And as long as that happens, and as long as we stay up here, then we should still see the 20-week SMA move up. Now remember, ideally speaking, we would like to hold the bull market support band while both the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA are going up. We don't want to continue chasing the 20-week SMA down as it continues to go down every single week for months, or maybe at least a couple months or so. If you really said maybe starting in June, going to July, August, and then maybe part of September. So maybe 3 months or so of a decreasing 20-week moving average. Okay, so far we're looking good. Now let's talk about the other moving average that we also discussed. We said let's keep an eye on the 8-week moving average. And the reason why we want to do that is because during the last leg, we were above the 8-week moving average for basically the entirety of that leg. So we came down below the 8-week to test the bull market support band last late August and September and even early October. And then in early October, we got above the 8-week moving average and we were off to the races. Now we've come back down to test the bull market support band in early September. And we just had a weekly close that was very slightly above the 8-week moving average. Now this looks pretty good. But what I would say is that if we want to continue to be as conservative as possible, which again I do believe is the best way to navigate crypto, is to say, well, we have an open now above the 8-week moving average. If you're curious what the 8-week moving average is, it's about 47.8K or 47.7. I mean, it depends on what exchange you use again, but around 47.8K. We opened this week at around 48.2K. Okay, so we opened the week above the 8-week moving average, and we closed the week above the 8-week moving average. Okay, so we closed it above it and we opened above it. Now you might say, well, if we close above it, then we have to open above it. That's not actually true, because again, you might open above it one week, but then if it changes the following week, then you could actually be below it. So we've seen that happen in prior times and whatnot. We've seen that happen with a lot of different cryptocurrencies, where the moving average from one week to another moves up so much that even if you closed above it, then the next weekly candle opens below it. But in this situation, again, we closed above it, we opened above it. What would be the most ideal situation for the bulls now? It would be the open. We already have that above the 8-week, but it would also be a close above the 8-week moving average. And if we have a close above the 8-week moving average, I think that would look very, very bullish. So the main thing that we need to take out, I think, is 53K. All right. So, right now Bitcoin is sort of in this range right here between on the weekly time frame between 44 and then let's take this down to the weekly. So it's between, say, 44 and 52. Okay. So this is definitely a key area for us to watch. And of course, we will continue to provide updates on it. Now, if we go to the daily time frame, I want to show you a few things as well before we sign off here. If we go to the daily time frame, you can see again the red line is the 20-week SMA. You can see that we held it a number of times more or less right here and then all these wicks down here. And again, on the daily time frame, we held it right here. Okay, so the 20-week SMA has held so far. But one of the interesting things that that we should at least mention is that we were putting in, people talk about downtrends and uptrends and whatnot. And technically speaking, for a while, we were technically in a downtrend, right? And being technically correct is, of course, the best way to be correct. And what we were doing, we were putting in lower highs and lower lows. Okay, so we were putting in lower highs, and we were also putting in lower lows, if you want to call that one. It's not really a low, but if you want to keep calling these lows. So lower highs and lower lows. And now we've broken out of that pattern, of that downtrend that we were in. Okay, so Bitcoin is in fact showing that there are some signs of life. A lot of bears are calling for 10K Bitcoin and whatnot. I don't think we're going to go back to 10K. I mean, yes, there's always more room for downside, but I think $10,000 Bitcoin are just pipe dreams. I don't think they're ever going to happen at this point. And some of you are probably like, well, who thinks that? Believe me, there are a lot of bears that think that. A lot of them are calling for even lower prices than $10,000. I really don't see that happening. I mean, $10,000 is also, it's actually below our more conservative regression bands, right? I mean, like $10,000 would even be below this, the lower bound here. So I really have a hard time seeing that happen. And we actually did go below it over here in March, but that was again with the pandemic drop. So I really don't see that playing out. So what did this show? okay, this shows there are some signs of life, right? Like Bitcoin is not in this downtrend channel anymore that it was in basically from the beginning of September. We knew that September was going to be a bad month. Well, I should say we didn't know it. We speculated that the probability of September being a bad month was significantly high, considering that the last 4 Septembers have been red. It was not that hard to imagine that coming off of a very bullish August, that we might see a pullback in September back to the bull market support band, which we always said was in fact the most bullish scenario, to get above the bull market support band in August and then to come back down and test it as support in September. That was the most bullish scenario that was realistic. Okay, so now that Bitcoin has broken out of this downtrend, what can we say? Well, it's put in a higher lower high. You might say, what the hell does that mean? A higher lower high? Well, technically, it's still a lower high from this one. Okay, so technically we can say this is a lower high from here, but it's a higher high from this one so far, at least if you include the wicks. Okay, so I think that's an interesting point to say, you know what? At the very least, it is a higher lower high, meaning this is not technically the same downtrend we were in before. Now, of course, people might just redraw it and look at it this way and say, well, it's still technically a downtrend, but it's certainly not the same downtrend we were in. And that's my point in this situation, is that the main thing that Bitcoin needs to focus on doing now is breaking out above $53,000, because I think a break above 53K, you know, I mean, it makes a huge case against the bear narrative that it's a dead cat bounce, right? It makes a huge case against it to just say, you know what, everyone's calling this a dead cat bounce, at least the bears are. If we get above 53K after holding the bull market support band, I mean, that looks incredibly bullish. I mean, it looks really, really bullish if we can do that. So these are the areas that we need to watch. Of course, we'll continue to update every single week, every single day, more or less. So make sure you subscribe if you're not subscribed. I will remind you that we do have the Into the Cryptoverse NFT. It's going to be, we had 500 copies made, and I believe there's maybe 130, 140 copies left. But again, on October 4th, I should say that rather than saying tomorrow, because it depends on when you're watching it. On October 4th at 12 p.m. Eastern, all the copies not sold will just simply be burned, okay? So if you're curious, it's this most recent NFT here. The whole idea was getting through September. You sometimes just have to put the moon mission on hold and play a game of chess, okay? So go ahead and go check it out. Again, you can find all this at nft.intothecryptoverse.com. I'll leave a link down in the description below if you want to pick one up. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Definitely subscribe, click the bell icon to turn on notifications, check out the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com, and I will see you next time. Bye.